Okay, I think we can begin. I've gotten a text that we are now live on YouTube, so we may begin the proceedings.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I will call this meeting to order, the Tuesday, December 8th, 2020 ZDRB meeting. I will turn to staff to conduct the roll call for attendance, please.
Thank you. Chair Zagorczyk?
Here.
Vice Chair Miller?
Here.
Member Cook?
Here.
Member Pina? Member Pina, I don't think I could hear you on that one.
Here.
Oh, there we go. Member Jordan?
Here.
Thank you. All members are present.
Thank you very much. We will proceed to stand and deliver the pledge as coordinated as we can, all together. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic,
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
one
under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with
and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add to the agenda as it's written at this point?
No.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have been delivered the minutes from the previous meetings, quite a stack around. From the minutes, and if not, if there's any motion to adopt.
Just for the sake of correct record keeping, there were a few mistakes. The April 9th meeting listed that 3 of us were present. It did not include myself and Member Zagorczyk, Chair Zagorczyk. Same with the meeting of May 14th. Was the exact same thing. And October 8th meeting had no reports with it. It was just the agenda.
And staff can bring back that final minutes to you at the next meeting, and we can make those changes to the attendance for those first 2.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Member Cook. Very astute. I will point out that despite myself and Member, was it Pina not being on the agenda, there is references to us making motions and adopting. So that is, we were not erased from the record in its entirety. So we do appreciate that.
Okay, with that, with those corrections, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Any second? I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. I believe in this, just as a reminder of the process for any participants, we will go through the staff presentation. The ZDRB will ask questions of the staff, at which point we will then hear from the applicant, at which point the ZDRB will ask questions of the applicant, after which any public comment can be made, followed by discussion on the agenda item itself. But prior to that, is there any public comment prior to the agenda itself? If there's any member of the public who has come forward or any statements there.
Michael.
Yes.
Excuse me. I think we're moving on to, this is the property on Jefferson Street.
Yes, I'm about to do that. We're just going to, see if there's any public comment. I'm guessing there is not.
We've received no public comment.
Okay.
And I need to recuse myself from the proceedings as I live just down the street from the subject property.
So noted. We will miss you again, Vice Chair Miller.
Nice to see you all.
Likewise. Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Noted that Vice Chair Miller has disappeared, and we will proceed with the staff report.
And as I recall, Member Jordan, are you not also within the 300-foot buffer of this residence?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm within the 300-foot buffer or not, but I am on the other side of Starkey. And it seems as though all the information that's presented is within the boundary of Starkey to Weber. And I'm almost all the way to Padroni. So I would guess I'm beyond 300 feet from that house. Yes. Purely a guess, though.
I think that, did we not have you recused last time?
He was not recused last time.
He was not. Oh, I apologize then. I am
That's
getting
right.
confused.
No problem. I think for the sake of consistency at this point, it would be, we should maintain his presence.
I consider myself to be on a different block. So I don't know if that matters or not, but.
Yeah, I apologize. I was mistaken.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, and
All
I
right.
should I should just clarify, for purposes of that rule with the distance requirement, there's a 500-foot requirement and a 1,000-foot requirement, and it's as the crow flies. So for property that you own, if it's within those distances, there's a stricter requirement for 500 feet and different standards that apply for 500 to 1,000, and then much more relaxed standards if you're over 1,000 feet. So I don't know where your personal residence is located. If it's within that 500 or 500 to 1,000, there is an analysis to go through for that process. Defer to you as you know the location relative to the property at issue this evening.
Okay. I certainly am within 500 feet.
Right. All right. If that's the case, then I think my recommendation this evening is for you not to participate based on that 500-foot rule.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously then I will recuse myself. Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay.
Is there a process for direct calculation of the 500 to 1,000 foot beyond guesstimates?
So in the past, staff has created a map using their GIS system, and you plot where the boundaries of the public official's property is, and then can map it directly in a feed to the current property.
Yeah,
that's at issue.
And what I guess the issue that I would want to point out is that we would have a consistency issue because Member Jordan opined and participated in the previous agenda. This is a direct follow-up that also takes into account feedback that he himself made and voted on. So I'm seeking to understand the 500 to 1,000 feet. I'm not asking to change the rule or do anything, but we are a very small town.
Sure.
And a lot, you could fit a lot of the town within a few thousand feet. So especially for central locations like this.
Yes.
And Chair Zagorczyk, to your point, I would just mention that for the last meeting, we used a 300-foot buffer for this, and I'm not sure if that's changed or if that was incorrect. And I would defer to Director Liston and the town attorney on that.
So we prepare conflict maps and share those with each of the members. I thought that was a 500-foot radius. I'm trying to pull up the map now so that we can refer to it to see if Member Jordan's property falls within that. We do refer to them casually in our office before meetings to make sure that there isn't a conflict. We had thought that it only applied to Miller. So I'd have to put my hands on the conflict map to tell with certainty whether the property is included or not. And of course, I'm having trouble finding it.
And to the chair's question, it's a statewide requirement, and it is frustrating in smaller jurisdictions with the shorter distance. And something that other public officials on the council also will struggle with too.
So I just went on Google Earth and technically it says I'm 536 feet away.
Great.
I don't know if that is something you can trust or use, but
You want to jump out and maybe do some paces and get back to us?
I have a wheel on my truck. I could run it off really fast.
Unless Sandra has other information, if it's more than 500 feet away and it's on the other side of the block from you, I think it's safe to participate.
I think so too. And in particular, considering there's precedent for previous involvement. So I think in the interest of time and Member Jordan, your diligent use of technology will proceed and adhere to the process moving forward, just given the size of the town and the rigors of the law. And with that, let's proceed.
Like how important it is that each one of the members refers to the map before each meeting. Did it freeze?
It did, but we caught the last half of it, and
okay.
Interpreting it as we need to come prepared with our perspective on distance based on the maps that you provided.
Well, we will issue new maps if you don't have them, and the message is just please refer to those because while we want to remind you when we know there's a conflict, ultimately it is your responsibility to know that. But we will help you.
Fair and noted, and thank you. And if you could, in fact, have an electronic version of that to distribute, we'd appreciate it.
I found a conflict map that had previous member Karen Laz on it, which is just halfway down the street from Member Jordan.
Yeah.
And it was like the line went right at the creek. So it's very possible, if we can go ahead without any problems, but it's very possible that he is right on the line. I don't have a current map.
Well, I think the Google map showing it's more than 500 feet is sufficient. If the board member is all right with that estimation, and I think that unless staff has some other interpretation of that foot rule, I think that's sufficient information.
Okay.
Agreed. Otherwise, you would only be able to comment on the bottom half of the property. Sorry, little DDRB humor.
It's all right. You don't find a lot of humor in the Fair Political Practices Commission regulations.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's why you're the lawyer. So we'll proceed based on the information that Member Jordan has put together, and we'll adhere to the self-management policy moving forward, just to ensure coherence and adherence. So we'll proceed with the staff report. Please now pass it on to the staff team.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, good evening, ZDRB members. Tonight, the only public hearing item we have for your review is a continuation from last meeting, which is the lot split, 2 new single-family residences and 2 accessory dwelling units at 6630 Jefferson Street. Quick reminder, the subject parcel is an approximately 15,912 square foot lot at the southeast corner of Jefferson and Creek Street. It abuts Hopper Creek. The applicants are seeking to remodel the existing single-family residence that has historic portions there, raise the non-historic portions, add an ADU, a freestanding garage, or sorry, an attached garage, and then a single-family home, an ADU, and a detached garage on the east new lot. This project originally came before you last month, and the staff report from that meeting is attached as a reference. And during that meeting, the board members identified several issues that prevented them from approving the project as presented. As a reminder, the original project you can see here on the top. The issues that the board identified included direct access from the ADU to the attached garage on the west lot, non-compliant setbacks on the east lot, the use of ADU side setbacks instead of garage side setbacks for the attached ADU garage on the west lot, uncommon exterior cladding materials on the east lot, overly modern design elements and a lack of rustic or historic ones on the east lot, and the two-story nature of the house also on the east lot. Additionally, during public comment, Additionally, during public comment, the neighbors to the east expressed their concern that the east lot house might cause privacy concerns and could impinge on their enjoyment of their outdoor space. As a reminder, this is the lot directly to the east of this, the lot in question, and there is a 0 lot line barn on that lot that is used as an accessory dwelling unit. The applicant submitted revised plan sets, which significantly address these concerns. Of note, the following design changes were made to the west lot. Let me just move to the west lot. The side setback for the attached garage and ADU you see at the on the top photograph to the right was increased to 5 feet. ZDRB members had made a note that the use of an ADU side setback at 4 feet was less desirable than the standard garage side setback of 5 feet. And so they've altered that. The interior garage door of the attached ADU and garage that you see here has also been removed. ZDRB members had noted that this door could indicate that the garage parking spot was reserved for the ADU, thereby removing a parking spot for the primary residence. And additionally, the AC unit and pool equipment are located to the south and to the west of the house, and ZDRB members had noted that these were not specifically identified in earlier plans. Going back to the east lot. The following design changes were made to the east lot house that you see here. The orientation of the house, garage, and ADU have essentially been flipped east to west. The single-story ADU and single-story garage are now located along the eastern property line. And this is in response to the public comment that there could be privacy concerns with the previous orientation. And now the ADU and garage for this house are fully shielded by the 0 lot line barn that is on the adjoining property. And I can show you how that looks here. So on the lower photograph or rendering, you can see the shape in brown of that 0 lot line barn that is existing, and behind it, the proposed attached garage and ADU. Just going back. As a result of mirroring this orientation, the setback to the east has been increased to over 31 feet, further addressing privacy concerns from these neighbors. And the non-compliant setback on the west property line has been rectified and is now compliant at 5 feet for the first floor and 8 feet for the second floor. The peak height of the house has been reduced by 1 foot 1 inch. This results in a total overall structure height of 21 feet 11 inches. For reference, the maximum allowed height for a 1-story house is 20 feet. The reduction in peak height of the east house results in it being about 2 feet and 5 inches lower than the peak of the west house that fronts Jefferson Street. Additionally, you can see here that a roof break has been added to the east house roof line where it meets the dormers. So before we had this sort of very straight A-frame look to it, and now you can see that break that comes out and provides a silhouette that is much more common, much more rural, and more common throughout Yountville. ZDRB members had noted that the original design was too modern, and this was one of the elements that contributed to that overall modern feeling. Another change that was made was that the width of the silver cedar planks has been increased to more accurately emulate reclaimed barn siding, which is the look that they were trying to go for. ZDRB members had noted that the originally proposed planks were not very common in Old Town and perhaps had a more commercial feel. And in addition to the roof break, several smaller changes were made to the overall design, responding to ZDRB's concerns that the overall look was not rural or vernacular to the area. These include a change in color to the standing metal seam roof, which is now a muted gray instead of a dark black. The garage door has been changed from a standard painted black articulated door to silver cedar double doors. There have been exposed rafter tails added to the edge of the roof line here. You can see them pointing out that add more texture, break up the design a little, and provide an element that is seen in older homes throughout the district. Additionally, the large columns that were existing on the front and back porch you can see here, have been reduced to these 6x6 wooden posts that parallel the wooden posts on the front porch of the existing historic home that faces Jefferson Street. There was also hog wire railing detail that was added to the second story porch to again provide more texture to the home. The side light windows to the side of the door were removed, and these are typically more seen on more modern homes and not the older homes in the district. And to that end, also the door was swapped out for a traditional Dutch door, and smaller elements like these metal sconces were added to the design. Also, the AC unit and pool equipment are now located at the southwest corner of this house, and that had not been specifically identified in earlier plans. Some final changes that were made to this plan is that all the replacement trees will be selected from native oak species, and that responds to a ZDRB concern that was not specifically conditioned in the previous plan. The last change that I'd call out is that there was a slight change to the pitch of the roofs. However, they remain consistent with code requirements and now are at, for the west house, between 8 to 12 and 9 to 12, and for the east house, between 8 to 12 and 9 to 12, and for the west house, they're 7.5 to 12, 7.5 and 12, and that is consistent with the code. And so those are the primary changes that we saw in this application. And with that, I will, additionally, there was 2 letters that were submitted by the applicants responding to the discussion during the last ZDRB of the 50% rule. As you'll recall, this block already exceeds 50% two-story structures according to staff's traditional interpretation of this part of the municipal code. There are 7 existing two-story structures and 6 existing one-story structures. The applicants provided 2 separate letters that provide a different interpretation to staff's traditional interpretation. And beyond that, they also, using staff's traditional interpretation, explain why they believe this parcel merits a 2-story home. But of course, those are decisions for the ZDRB. And with that, I will turn it back over to the board for discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Just as a reminder to the applicants and everyone involved, this part of the Q&A is specific for the board to ask questions, clarifying questions at staff, after which we'll turn it back to the applicants to share more of their insights. So I will go one by one to see if there's any questions in random order. So Member Jordan, do you have any questions of staff?
No, I don't. No.
Member Pina, any questions of staff?
No, I don't.
Member Cook?
Yes, I do. Couple questions. Since it looks like the house currently sits on what the developer would like to be the new lot line, will the approval of this lot split depend on the removal or relocation of the current home, like the lot split that was presented on Talent Lane last year? And is the developer aware of that?
Yes, they're proposing to move the house approximately 8 feet to the east. That was included in the original staff report, and I believe it remains unchanged in this revised application. It will not sit on the lot line.
No, but they would not be on the Talent Lane property. They were not granted a lot split until and unless the property was actually removed from what would be the lot line.
Oh, I see. No, that hasn't been conditioned as a specific condition of approval for this, but we could include that. But we do have a requirement that they do have to construct the plans as presented, and the parcel map is part of that plan set, so they would have to construct it as presented.
So it all comes down to a timing issue. If the house sits on what will be the new lot line, they cannot record the map to allow those conditions to exist, and they would have to phase the project to remove the encroaching elements, then record the map, and then proceed with the development.
Yeah, member Kick, you're muted.
And they are aware of that. Okay.
I believe that was a question.
Daniel muted me.
Oh.
Is the developer aware of that timing issue?
And I'm sorry, I was dealing with that. The timing issue. Yes, they are. I will make sure that they are specifically aware of it, but it is included in materials that we give the applicants.
Okay, because that was a surprise to the people on Talent Lane. Number 2 was just a couple typos under development standards, primary dwelling west lot. That's page 30. Proposed setback for the front porch should be 15 feet, not 15 inches.
Oh, yes.
And on the same page, next line, it should be 20 feet, 4 inches, not 20 inches. And then my other comment was conditions of approval, number 5, calls for the hedge to be specifically maintained at an 8-foot height because it is known to be a species that grows taller. And I really don't feel that there's any way to regulate or monitor that. So unless the town has a way of following up and maintaining that, I would suggest that they use a different hedge plant be spec'd. And those are all my questions.
Well, we do enforce hedge height throughout town using our standard code enforcement procedures. That's something that we've done this year. So I know it's not immediately visible like other hedges throughout town, but there is a mechanism for us to enforce it.
Okay. I mean, if you spec'd a different, if you require them to spec a different hedge that didn't get that tall, then it wouldn't be an issue for the town to monitor.
Yes, indeed. Of course, it's always better to plant the right size hedge or plant for the right area. So that could be a condition if you wanted them to change that out.
I would think that would make it easier for everybody. Those are all the questions I have for staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Cook. I just have one question for staff. In terms of the area allocated to determine a block that thus led to the calculation of the 50% 1-story, 2-story rule, can you remind me what the original area that staff used to do the calculation?
Yeah, for this calculation, we used, so you use traditionally a block between intersections because Creek Street doesn't continue through. We use the entire block from Weber to Starkey on both sides of the street, including both corner houses. There are 2 commercial buildings to the south that do not count for this block as they are commercial inns.
And then just to clarify, accessory dwelling units are included in the calculation. Is that correct?
Traditionally, no. Accessory dwelling units have not been included in the two-story calculation.
Okay. And can you remind me what were the totals in terms of total number of dwellings that were 1-story and 2-story in the original staff calculation?
The existing conditions on the street are 7 2-story homes and 6 1-story homes.
Did you review I assume yes, but I'm just sort of asking, one of the 2 letters, which was presented as call it a recalculation of the boundaries?
Yes, staff reviewed that letter. It was shared with the town attorney, who provided an opinion, which was included in this agenda packet. Essentially, the town attorney confirmed that staff's traditional interpretation is a legal interpretation, and that there's no problems with it. However, it's always ultimately a decision for the ZDRB.
Yeah, I was mainly wondering why the numbers are so different, right? Because I'm looking at the letter, which counts essentially 22, and I think it's including ADUs, I think, as part of it, but I wasn't sure. I wanted staff's comment on the calculation and why they're different.
Well, I would share that the calculation that was provided by staff was based on the number of 2 stories on the parcels, because it's no more than 50% of the parcels rather than 50% of the structures. And we see that many of the homes also have an ADU. There's the lot to the south of the subject property that has 3 separate dwellings on it. And so there are more structures that are located on the block, but we're really looking at the number of parcels and calculating the 50%.
So but I guess if you had 3 structures on one parcel and 2 of them were a single story and 1 of them was 2 stories, then you would then say that parcel was effectively a 2-story parcel. Is that correct? It's not the number of structures? Okay. I just wanted to understand the difference in that calculation. And so what you're saying is that so this calculation, while logical in its interpretation of the area, is not accurate from a legal guideline.
Well, it is inconsistent with staff's traditional interpretation, which has been supported by the town attorney.
Yes. And did you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's based on the opening line of that subdivision 4B there. The prohibition of that section is really in the first sentence, and it just says no more than 50% of the parcels. The rest of that section is about how you calculate that and how you think about it, and also how the ZDRB can choose to disregard certain parcels with 2-story structures under certain circumstances and the things you can factor, and then also the ability to apply an exception. The primary prohibition is on the number of parcels that contains it, not the number of structures that exist on any given parcel.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to clarify that so that it essentially puts us back to the discussion that we had in the previous ZDRB meeting, that this information doesn't change the decision-making process and the interpretation of how to apply the rule. Okay. But I would, go ahead.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Is that Mr. Bell's interpretation and discussions of the second paragraph specifically says that in the first sentence in the second paragraph, it applies to the whole paragraph. And it is just for counting. The discretion of the ZDRB is used for just counting which of the existing structures should be considered 2 stories. it's not saying that we have the discretion to allow new things to be built if they relative to visibility or location or massing. The second paragraph of the code specifically calls out existing structures, and I believe that's what the town attorney mentioned.
Can you read the sentence you're referring to? Sorry, just so I'm looking at the same thing.
Sure. It's municipal code 18.36.020, the second paragraph. It says, in determining which two-story structures should be counted toward this limitation of 50%, the ZDRB may take into account the relative visibility, location, and massing of existing two-story structures in the vicinity, the width of the street, significant vegetation, and other factors that may mitigate the visual impact of such structures.
And I'm
It's only referring to existing.
I'm happy to clarify to that portion of the memo, and as I read that second paragraph of that section. So your question is whether or not there's a second story structure on that parcel. If the answer is yes, it counts towards the 50% rule on that block once you've determined it.
Yes.
This second paragraph allows you to not count it as a second story structure and therefore not count it towards the 50% rule if you base it on relative visibility, location, and massing. So it's a way to get the number below the 50% on a case-by-case basis by analyzing the other current second story structures that exist on parcels.
Yes, it's not to apply that criteria to a proposed new home.
Correct.
Yeah. And, you know, in that, and I recall that was sort of central to the discussion on this, was that the, you know, splitting of an existing parcel, does that effectively rebalance the calculus, you know, based on a 50% rule that was really designed for existing parcels more than it was to account for the creation of new parcels. So we should certainly revisit that that discussion.
So the question is, would you count both parcels that would be in existence after the split towards the number of parcels on that block or not?
Correct.
And I would ask staff how that's been done before, and perhaps there hasn't been a circumstance where this has come up in recent memory, but perhaps Sandra or Daniel can chime in on maybe some past examples of how that's been done, if it has been.
Well, we've had, the most recent example is on Yountville Crossroad, and it was a parcel that faced the street. And we looked at these considerations in the second paragraph to see whether any of the structures should be excluded. And there was a feeling that no, they shouldn't. One structure was set back a great distance from the street. There was heavy vegetation that may have weighed in favor of that. But the vote of the board and so the support of the council was that there wasn't the justification to remove it. This is the second time we've seen that request, and we've known that we'll be receiving more and more of these requests because houses are purchased, they're raised and reconstructed, and many of the blocks are at this 50% tipping point. So, so this is only the second time that it's been considered in my history with the town of 12 years. And that's what I can share.
Sandra, just to clarify, was the example that you gave on Yountville Crossroad the result of a lot split, or just in general?
It was the result of a lot split, but that was conducted over 10 years ago, and the design of the structure was just recently considered. So they weren't at the same point in time as this application is. But the lot split was used to justify the denial because it made the findings difficult to make, because the applicants were aware that they were creating the hardship when they split the lot, and they were aware of those constraints, and they proceeded anyway. That was one of the most significant findings that couldn't be made.
And so generally you would look to the conditions that would exist if you approved it. And so Otherwise, you run the risk of approving something, and the only way to carry out those provisions would be a violation of the code. But that doesn't change your authority to count or discount other second-story structures on the street that currently exist in reaching whether or not 50% is met.
Understood. Okay. Are there any other questions of staff before we move to the applicant? All right. No other questions. We'll pass it on to the applicant. Rick, if you wanted to, oh, and any of your Mark or anyone else that you've brought with you, by all means, feel free to add more and update us as you see fit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Joining me this evening, in addition to my wife, Tracy, is Joel Dickerson of Madrone Engineering, Mark Becker, who is the project architect, and Kirsty Shelton, who was not at the last meeting. She's with Palisades Land Use, and we asked for her assistance for analyzing this 50% limitation. So Kirsty's gonna chime in toward the end of the presentation, I believe. Daniel, I think you have our slides, but before we start with the slides, could you put up that inspirational photo? You know, since our meeting last month, we've kind of rolled up our sleeves, did additional work.
All right, Daniel, I just wanted to make sure that, were you putting something up?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Give me
while
one
he's
second.
doing
Yeah.
that,
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't want to miss the moment, but thank you. Please, Sakari, go ahead.
So since the last meeting, we've kind of rolled up our sleeves. We've reconsidered a number of things. My mother used to tell me all the time that listening is a skill. So we tried to apply that skill as a result of the last meeting. And so we found a architectural style that we thought more accurately depicted the look we were going for on the east house. There you go. That's it, Daniel. And so this was the inspirational photo we used, and Mark used to make some of the adjustments that Daniel referenced in his staff overview. So we'll get to the 50% limitation in a few minutes, but at first I'd like maybe Mark to take over the presentation, talk about this inspirational photo a little bit, and then Daniel will jump into the applicant's presentation.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's Mark Becker. How are you? Yes, as Rick stated, our intent is really to try to create the back structure to be sort of more rustic than the front structure, almost tying in, bridging the gap with the neighbor's barn, which has a similar roof configuration. And what you'll see in this photo, there's a lot of elements to this that we really like. The wider planks, the lighter roof, the standing seam roof. We opted not to go with the color of the doors. We went more of a black, which we think is a little bit more subtle. But the stonework is very similar. The landscaping, some of the landscaping is similar. So we just feel like one of the things that came up in the last meeting is, in my mind, one of the primary things that initially was trying to understand the materials, the textures, the look, the essence of that. And so we thought having an image that clearly depicts what we want to do would be a good starting point. I think from here, and if we can go to the next, I can just kind of regurgitate sort of what you covered, kind of with my own interpretation on why we did what we did, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the start of your sentence, Mark. You would cut out a little bit.
If you can just go to the next slide, that would be great. The beginning of the.
Okay, did you want me to start the applicant presentation?
Just,
Yes.
yeah, just our presentation, Daniel, would be good.
Okay, one second, please.
So really, the front house is remained. The design hasn't changed. We made a few minor adjustments based on the board's comments. They were all very easy to take care of, and we appreciate the feedback. All of it made sense. I think the real issue was on the east lot, which is the lower parcel. And you know, based on the input that we had, I kind of felt like we had about 4 primary issues that we had to deal with. It was the design. There were some critiques of the design. It felt too modern. It really wasn't resonating, and we kind of I kind of touched on that in the earlier slide. But then there was also the location of the house, its positioning, and its impact or potential impact on any neighbors. And really the only real impacted neighbor was the neighbor behind us to the east. Again, height.
Daniel, you could go to the next slide, please.
Oh yeah, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, this really kind of is sort of a before and after. The previous design, as Daniel pointed out, was more kind of modern and a little bit more stark. I was actually referencing a building in downtown that was more modern, and I didn't realize that that wasn't something that would be favorable. So, but based on the input I received, it was crystal clear that we needed to do a lot of work articulating spaces, creating more of a covered porch, a little bit more country, downtown old school feel with the house. So essentially we were looking at design, siting, the positioning of the house, the height, and then ultimately massing on the lot. And so from a design standpoint, maybe we can go to the next slide, Daniel. Yeah, this really sums everything up. We really, the very first thing we did actually was I went out to the site the next day. I saw a letter come across from the east neighbor. I listened to staff. They were playing around with setbacks. So I wanted to really go back and really get a sense on the impact that the previous design would have on the eastern neighbor in particular. And as I looked at it, I thought, you know, I can see how, you know, being 8 feet or 6 feet away from the property line with a house of this scale, to be honest, whether it's a 1-story or 2-story, I mean, we're only about a 2-foot differential in height. It would be a relative scale either way, but I realized that, you know, we should really relook at this and see if we can pull that further away. And so I studied the lot and realized that we could effectively flip the lot and put the ADU and the garage adjacent to the neighbor's property and make it all work. And where really the barn is taller than the ADU, and the only thing projecting beyond the barn would be the garage. So that was the very first thing we looked at was how the house was positioned. How could we give relief in scale, in particular to the eastern lot? But more importantly, I think were design issues. I think Ms. Cook in particular brought up a lot of points that I really appreciate and made me really reevaluate the design. And one of those elements was the covered porch and really making it feel a little bit more like a covered porch. And so when I went back to the image gallery and we really honed in on the image that we'd really like this to be, a number of things would factor in, but obviously introducing rafter tails, more transparent deck railing, a little bit more shadow lines with eave projections, window grids, a Dutch door, all of those items really help to contribute to giving it more texture and tie in, I think, more in keeping with what the expectations were of the board. Daniel, can we go to the next slide, please? So really, I think this is the most important vantage point. And sticking with design for a second, what we did is brought in a roof break on the new house and lowered the roof by another foot. And so we really got this as low as we could, and we're really just using dormers to pop through for some bedrooms. But the scale of this, as you can see, is pretty low profile. And to further illustrate that, on the lower left, you can see, and on the lower right, you can see the barn of the neighbors kind of in the shadow in front. And so what we really tried to do is show, okay, what would this look like from the neighbor's house? And this is where I was on the other street when I was interpreting this. And if we were to if the garage is in the foreground, you can barely see the peak of the other house, of the main house. It's 31 feet away. And honestly, we feel like this mitigates any privacy issues and any massing issues, and is honestly just a better solution for the site. Can we go to the next slide, Daniel? So this is a kind of a graphic where we really can show the neighbor's barn, which is on the property line, and how we've pushed the building back to create space. I think it's important to know also that if this was just a single lot and somebody were to build a 2-story house, that setback would be 20 feet from Jefferson. So we're further away than even what the rear yard setback would be if they were to expand the other house. As far as the ADU and garage is probably where an ADU would be regardless. So what we really tried to do is create as much space as we could, and by utilizing the garage as the screening device, so to speak. We go to the next one, Daniel. All this is emphasizing is that we honestly feel, I definitely feel that if we were to go, if we had to put everything on one floor, we would first be eating up quite a bit more surface area, and we really would be forced to be, 5 feet from the property line. And this is the 20-foot version. This really is only 2 feet lower than the 2-story version, but just by default, we would have to be closer. And we really feel that this would be much more impactful to a neighbor than what we're proposing. Could you go to the next one, Daniel? So our calculations, I don't really need to cover that. I just thought we'd go to the site plan. Why don't you hop over one more? Yeah, right there, the site plan is probably the best one. So what you can see is on the front lot, on the west lot, we identified the couple of areas that were brought up by the board last time. We pushed the garage to 5 feet in the ADU. We identified the AC and the pool equipment, and we eliminated the interior access to the ADU. On the other lot, on the east lot, I think this really identifies how much space we've created from the lot to the east. And in doing so, we feel like we can still achieve what we want to achieve and not eat up the whole lot with structure. If we were to put 1,900-foot house on this lot, we would effectively need to push the house all the way over, quite possibly lose the ADU, and the garage would go back just to the other side. So the massing, I just think it's just not as good of a solution. I think it's much better to preserve more land for landscaping and trees and screening, and just sneak these few bedrooms upstairs with some dormers. I think we've really worked hard to create the scale lower than the front lot, and I think we illustrated that on the back. Okay, Dan, please. Again, this is landscaping that just kind of further illustrates the plan. I don't think there's much that I need to really cover here. I think what I'd like to do is actually just get to the 3D
Mark, actually, if we could wait just for 1 second on that. So why don't I take over for here, and I'll let you chime in the 3D rendering.
Perfect.
So Daniel, yeah, as Mark said, that this site, the landscape plan didn't really change other than to adapt to the new site plan on the east lot. The other thing it does is add the 4 native oaks. That was the recommendation of staff in the 36-inch box, the 24-inch box, and 2 15-inch box trees, which are noted at the top of the page there. So you can go to the next one, Daniel. This tree preservation change at all. It's the same count. So we can go, it just reflects the new site plan. Okay, so what happened?
Sorry, that was a problem with my mouse. Let me just get back.
No problem. It's the that slide there, yeah, Daniel, the maps. What I thought was worth while to spend just a few minutes, we want to be respectful of everybody's time, is to explain how the 50% limitation became an issue at the last ZDRB meeting. So it's certainly the case that, you know, we met with Sandra back as early as January or February of this year, and she made us aware of the 50% limitation on 2-story structures. And we proceeded to evaluate the project, and I'll go into it in a little bit about how we ultimately came to the ultimate design, with actually the encouragement of the historic resource expert, Naomi Moroglio. But so on the Friday before the last ZDRB meeting, Daniel sent out a copy of his staff report that indicated that we were compliant with the 50% limitation. And I believe maybe there was an error on it, but we didn't realize that. And while our count was different, because of what I'll get into in a minute, we didn't really focus on the fact that the staff's count was off from ours. We just focused on the fact that the staff report indicated that it was compliant. So at the meeting, we became aware that apparently an error was discovered, and that we did not any longer maintain compliance with the 50% limitation. So we went through the meeting. We were taken aback a little bit by that because we didn't quite understand why the math could be different. And what I did, what Tracy and I did, was we walked the block and we counted the number of structures. And so you can see on this chart on the left, we went address by address, counted the number of 1-story dwelling units, the number of 2nd-story dwelling units, and came to the total that the chairman referenced earlier, that is significantly different than staff. So that prompted me to send, well, we reached out to some land use advisors and a local prominent land use attorney. We ran the ordinance by them, or the design standard by them, that's up in the right-hand corner there. And they kind of conferred and agreed with our interpretation. So that prompted me to write the first letter that I think that kind of put forward our rationale for why we think our count is accurate. That prompted a response from the town attorney, Mr. Bell, which we got last Friday. And we then responded with a letter that we delivered to Daniel yesterday. So what I would tell you is it was, you know, first of all, it's obvious that we weren't looking to instigate a protracted legal battle because we didn't ask our prominent land use attorney to attend this meeting. And our approach is really more of a practical approach and one of equity. And at the end of the day is to ask the ZDRB what the true intent of the 50% limitation is. So what I'd like to do is go through our rationale on why we think we qualify for an exception. And then perhaps Mr. Bell can opine on whether he agrees with this or not. But the next couple of slides just walk through, you know, what our rationale is. But Daniel, before you change slides, in our read of the municipal code and our attorney's opinion of the municipal code was that the ZDRB has generally broad authority to grant an exception if the ZDRB establishes 5 findings of fact. The first finding is whether there's an unusual circumstance. We believe our property, the subject property at 6630 Jefferson, has a number of unusual circumstances, not the least of which is the encroachment of Hopper Creek the further east you travel along the northern property line. The creekside setback encroaches 26 feet in the northwest corner of what is proposed to be the east lot, and 36 feet on the northeast corner of the east lot, and thereby reduces the buildable area by approximately 3,100 square feet. The second finding, and there's some other unique characteristics and unusual circumstances that I'll go to in a second, but the second finding indicates that the unusual circumstance was not created or attributable to the applicant or owner of the property, and the restriction of the buildable area on the east lot we think presents a practical difficulty in developing the east lot with a single-story residence, which would likely result in the elimination of the ADU and would be contrary to the state's infill housing initiative. So Daniel, if you could go, I think the next slide's just a placeholder. Yeah, so if you can go to the next slide. So going back several months, our design team deliberated for an extensive period of time. Naomi Miroglio, the historic resource architect, strongly encouraged us to keep the sole main structure along the 100 feet of frontage on Jefferson Street to be the historic home, and specifically the historic 2-story portion of the home, and encouraged us to split the lot rather than side by side, but front to back. And initially, I would admit that both Tracy and I were a bit resistant to that idea. But the idea started to grow on us over time. We engaged Mark Becker. He put together these renderings that you see before you today. And slowly but surely, we became convinced that this is really the most appropriate treatment for the historic resource. It balances the site and restores the prominence of this house that was built in the 1880s. So salving a historic structure and maximizing its post-restoration prominence along Jefferson Street is also a factor that does not generally apply to other properties in the Old Town District, and is a mitigating factor for the potential redevelopment of the property. We acknowledge that utilizing the town's interpretation of the 50% limitation, we acknowledge that if the existing lot was split side to side, with both lots having frontage on Jefferson Street, that the 50% limitation would require the new non-historic house to be a single-story structure, given the visual impact on the streetscape. And so we made a conscious decision to split the lot front to back to restore the prominence of the historic resource, and the unusual circumstances that apply to the east lot render a better and less massed plan to be a 2-story home rather than a 1-story home. So the other distinguishing features that I think this lot has, at 15,912 square feet before any split, the existing parcel is nearly twice the size of the largest permissible lot in the Old Town District. So after the split, each lot is just 44 square feet less than the maximum permissible lot size at 8,000 square feet. That is pretty unusual, particularly given that this large lot is impacted by the creekside setback, which does not apply to more than a handful of properties in the town. Daniel, if you can move to the next slide. So I took this picture yesterday, and this is the existing condition from the T intersection at Creek Street and Jefferson Street. You can see that large live oak that's behind the black four-door car. That is the French Laundry's car. That's in the just off our property line. So the trunk of the tree would be in the Creek Street right away, and the property to the right would be where our property line starts. And then you can see along the frontage, we go past the large redwood tree. So in this particular photo, even considering that we're entering winter and more trees are on the more leaves are on the ground than in the trees, you can barely see the west house, let alone where the east house would potentially be from this vantage point. So we asked Mark Becker. Daniel, you can go to the next slide. Mark developed a 3D model in CAD of the siding of the properties to scale based on his plan and the survey. We also located the trees according to the tree preservation plan, and Mark indicated those on his 3D model. There's a note, Daniel, you're cutting it off just a little bit on the top of the screen. There are another 4 large trees in the northeast corner of the property that aren't even shown on Mark's little mock-up here. That wouldn't be shown on the rendering we did, so we excluded them. But all of those trees are on the the south bank of Hopper Creek. There's nearly a similar amount of large oak, elders, and elm trees on the north bank of Hopper Creek on Councilman Knight's property. But they would not be shown in our rendering either. So Daniel, go to the next page with the 3D rendering. So this is a 2-scale rendering with replicating the landscaping as close as we can. You can see that large live oak is on the left-hand side of the picture. And you can barely see, and this vantage point will show you the most house based on Mark's modeling that you would see from Jefferson Street. If you go north on Jefferson Street, the trees along the Hopper Creek riparian corridor start to significantly block any visibility to the east lot. If you go south on Jefferson Street, the historic resource home completely blocks the east house from view. So what I think this illustrates, and Mark, maybe you wanted to make a comment about the 3D rendering, but generally, given the many unique characteristics of the subject property, we believe that an exception for a 2-story structure on the east lot would not constitute a grant of special privilege to the applicants, Tracy and I, which is the third finding of fact for an exception to be granted. One thing to note on this plan, and the reason that the east house is so hidden from view, is because the creek, Hopper Creek, begins to encroach further into the property as you go east. The west house, or the historic resource house, is 15 feet 8 inches closer to Hopper Creek or the northern property line than the east lot. It sits much further back. I think Daniel also noted earlier that the historic resource on the west lot is actually, I think, almost 2.5 feet, maybe 2 feet 5 inches taller than the current rendition of the revised house on the east lot. Mark, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, just a small comment. I think this just kind of reinforces, I mean, everything that we've been talking about, that the East House really isn't visible from any, certainly not from the creek side and barely from Jefferson Street. And so what we really decided to do was focus on, okay, how can we make sure that this is not impactful to the eastern neighbor, which would be the only person that would see this. I would really strongly argue that for that additional 2 feet of height, we've opened up so much more terrain. We probably are making the massing significantly better for the eastern neighbor than if we were to build a one-story house. I think it would be much more impactful. I think 2 feet taller than the one-story height limit, I think we've been able to really keep this condensed and at a very intimate scale. And as you can see from the rendering, it's just of no impact whatsoever. So I agree with Rick. I think that this is in the spirit of the interpretation of one-story, two-story, to be honest with you. And I think really what it's about, whether it's 1 or 2 stories or 3 stories, it's all about massing. It's all about the spaces that are articulated and how is it articulated. You could have a horrific one-story house with a 20-foot height with 10-foot, 11-foot, 12-foot ceilings, or a gigantic 2-story house. But what we're really trying to do is create an intimate structure that's right for the site and that doesn't eat up the whole site with structure. So that would be the point of this rendering and why we went through the exercise that we did. So we could validate it for ourselves as well.
Thanks, Mark. So I think I left off on the third finding for an exception. So as Mr. Bell noted earlier, the 50% limitation design standard notes that the ZDRB may take into account the relative visibility, location, and massing of existing 2-story structures in the vicinity of the proposed development. We would submit to you that Chef Keller's residence across the street at 6629 Jefferson has very mature vegetation along Jefferson Street and Creek Street that screen the home from the road. When we were doing our count, we literally couldn't tell whether that was a 2-story or 1-story house. And ultimately, Chef Keller came out his gate in the front, and we simply just asked him. The other adjacent 2-story property to us is Councilman Knight's home, just north of us on the other side of Hopper Creek at 6638 Jefferson Street. And he has a significant setback from Jefferson Street and is also screened by the heavily wooded banks of Hopper Creek. Mr. Knight's home is very similarly sited on his lot as compared to the proposed development of our lot. So the fourth finding is whether the project would be material, or the granting of the exception would be materially detrimental or injurious to surrounding properties. To put it as tactfully as I can, the current existing historic home is deteriorating. When we got a home inspection on the house, when we originally put the house under contract, a typical home inspection is 2 or 3 pages. This one was 11. It's deteriorating. It's in need of major renovation. The riparian corridor was noted by Maggie Jensen, the landscape architect, as generally not being maintained in a healthy condition. And so, I think rather than materially detrimental or injurious, this would significantly enhance the value of the neighborhood and the enjoyment of the neighborhood. And the preservation of a home that was built in the 1880s with the quality architecture that Mark Becker has brought to the project in addition to an architecturally compatible second main residence, the installation of upgraded water-wise landscaping, and the ongoing maintenance of the Hopper Creek riparian corridor would significantly enhance this part of Old Town. So the fifth finding references the being in harmony with the general plan. So I'd ask Kirsty Shelton to kind of take over from here and make the final point in our presentation.
Thank you. I thought Rick did a really great job explaining why this property is so unique. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kirsty Shelton. I'm a local land use planner, and I actually started my career at Town of Yountville 20 years ago. I right after my master's degree, started at Town of Yountville and did the pathway plan, the Burgundy stamp part crosswalk. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm even more happy to help facilitate Rick and Tracy's dream. I want to briefly share the differences. I remember the general plan update in 1992. So the general plan update that you guys did last year was quite extensive. And I thought it would just take some time and just walk the ZDRB through the general plan consistencies with the by granting the 50% exception for the rear east lot. The land use policies in the general plan state that residential development shall be compatible with and integrate into the surrounding neighborhood and be respectful of its natural surroundings. It requires new residential development to avoid a design approach that exaggerates height, bulk, or mass and results in a design that is not compatible with neighboring properties. It requires it not to do that. Encourage new residential development that are designed to serve all the needs of income levels and residents of the town. Preserve the character, scale, and atmosphere of the Old Town Historic District by ensuring all new development is compatible with the vernacular of this district. It preserves the rural small town character and scale of Yountville. The housing policies within the Yountville General Plan state to establish residential densities that allow the continued development of single-family detached homes, continue to limit maximum lot sizes and unit sizes in single-family residential areas, to retain zoning ordinance provisions limiting single-family lot sizes and residence sizes. As Rick mentioned, the maximum lot size in this district is 8,000 square feet. The minimum is 5,000, and both lots would be just shy of 44 feet of the maximum lot size. Require new development to build at no less than the minimum number of dwelling units prescribed by the general plan density. For this area, this would be exactly what Rick is requesting. Continue to allow design flexibility and encourage a variety of home designs in the town's design ordinance. The town's design ordinance provides guidelines for the design of housing that allows flexibility in the building envelope while limiting floor area ratios. All of the units comply with floor area ratio. Continue to encourage smaller lot sizes in single-family residential areas and encourage single-family dwelling units on all residential lots. Require that new development models the additions to be of a scale, intensity, and a design that integrates with the immediate neighborhood, the town as a whole, and the natural surroundings. Encourage a variety of building heights and sizes in new development, and require the use of massing techniques that mitigate heavy or bulky forms, building placement that does not obstruct view corridors, and building design that is compatible with adjacent structures to ensure that new buildings do not overwhelm the site or the neighborhood, and permit two-story buildings. As I hope you agree, the Jefferson Street proposal overwhelmingly meets the goals and policies of the Yountville General Plan. In the event the board does not approve the exception to the 50% of parcels having a two-story structure for the east lot, the east lot would not meet the mentioned general plan policies, and this decision would prevent the ability for the east lot to have an ADU, because with a single one-story floor area, it would just take over the whole rear lot, like Mark has described. And lastly, and I'm sure the board is aware, January 1st of 2020, the changes to the ADU law became in effect in the state of California. This was to reduce barriers, streamline approval process, and increase access. I personally know the benefit of an ADU. I have a 23-year-old son trying to find a place to live right now during COVID, and I have a disabled father who currently lives in Yountville, both who would benefit from an ADU. I could go on and on about the benefits of an ADU, but I wanted to get to the point of the legislation, the legislative intent. The local entity should encourage the development of accessory dwelling units, and pursuant to government code, the California legislature found and declared that, among other things, California is facing a severe housing crisis, and ADUs are a valuable form of housing that meets the needs of family members, students, elderly, and in-home health care providers. Therefore, ADUs are an essential part of California and also mirrored by the Yountville General Plan. Without approving the exception to the 50% of the parcels having 2 stories, the East Lot would be required to have a 1-story structure, which, because of the environmental constraints, and I just want to reiterate that what Rick had mentioned, it's the Copper Creek setback for the rear lot at the maximum lot size is 3,100 square feet. This is an extremely unique characteristic, an extremely unique situation that no other lot in Yountville is going to have. And again, the reason why the lots are sited that way is to preserve the historic integrity of an 1880s home. So coupled with the 3,100 square feet of unusable area, an environmental constraint on top of the preservation of the historic house, we believe that not only does it make the findings, but by not allowing the 50% second story in this situation, it actually, the 1 story in the rear lot actually doesn't make the same majority of the town's general plans and state goals and policies. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be here for the rest of the evening and answer any questions. And thank you.
So thanks, Kirsty. I think we would just close maybe with 2 things. First of all, Member Cook asked at the very beginning of the meeting about whether we were aware of the requirement of the phasing of the project, and that we had to respect that no structure could encroach on the lot lines, as a result of the lot split. So the way this project would work is the historic 2-story portion of the home, which is, I think, 12 or 1,300 square feet, and is the front of the house. It's essentially 2 1-story additions on the back and the south side of the home. So those 2 1-story additions would be demolished. Then the historic portion, the 2-story portion of the house, would be lifted by a home relocation specialist, moved over 8 feet north and 8 feet closer to Jefferson. And once all that is done, then the lot lines would work without any encroachments from buildings. And the last thing I'd say as I started my part of the presentation is the purpose of us walking through the findings of fact was not necessarily to make a legal argument, but to make an equitable argument. And, Tracy and I have lived in Yountville for over 5 years now. We walk Old Town virtually every day. And I can't imagine that the intent of the town leadership, when the 50% limitation was envisioned and imposed, was designed to preclude a project of this quality. I just can't imagine that was the intent. It's not for me to tell you what the intent is, but I'd ask you to consider whether the intent of the 50% limitation was to preclude a redevelopment of this quality and to renovate and restore a building that was built in the 1880s. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to Rick and Tracy and the applicants and everybody who contributed. We will move to see if anyone has any questions of the applicants, the architect, or any of the experts they brought on board. I'll go one by one, starting with Member Cook. Do you have any questions or comments for the applicants?
I just wanted to say to Mark Becker that both of his designs are beautiful. I think they fit, the front house fits Yountville wonderfully, and it's very obvious that you took into consideration the comments that we had at the last meeting and made significant changes to that back, the east house, and that turned out very beautiful. One clarification to Mr. Becker's comments is under our municipal code, under the historic district. He made a comment about a huge house could be built on that lot. And there is a limitation of, on lots 10,000 square feet and greater, the maximum floor area of 2,500 square feet is allowed for a house. So it couldn't be a 4,000 square foot house just because it's a big lot. It would be 2,500, which is not significantly more than what they're looking at. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Cook. Member Jordan, any questions from the applicant or the team?
No question specifically. I just wanted to compliment them on the changes they made. They did a really nice job. The broken roof line, the exposed rafter tails are very much in keeping with our neighborhood. And really the back unit went from looking a little bit like Sea Ranch to looking like Old Town with what you did, which I really appreciate. Silly question, but I'm assuming you're going to have gutters. How deep do you think the gutters will be on the 2 units? Because they will cover up some of the rafter tails.
We'd probably go with copper or galvanized half round. So they'd probably be 4-inch. That's more authentic and it exposes the rafter tails the best.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. And I think an interesting thing to consider too is as you bring down the height of the ridge, that's going to drop the chimney too, right?
Correct. Everything drops proportionately.
Yeah. So the chimney goes from being something really prominent to a little quieter. So that, I think that's a nice result as well. That's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Member Jordan. Member Pena, any questions for the applicant or the team?
I don't have any questions. I want to just echo my fellow members and say that you did a really great job of really hearing what we had to say, taking it back to the drawing table and making the significant changes that you did. It's lovely.
Thank you, Member Pena. I don't have any questions for the applicant or the team, so we can segue into our board discussion at this point. Yeah, but I would echo everything that my fellow board members have said. The attention to detail, the diligence, the commitment to the process is absolutely, to the highest degree that I've seen, to date. And the care and the concessions and the considerations, I think, are really, really notable. And while this process tends to sometimes drag and get into details, if the result ultimately reflects the best of all worlds, then it's the ends certainly justify the means. I thought I've been thinking a lot about this, the 50% rule and the intent of it and why we are discussing it to the length that we are today. And I, 3 things surfaced for me. One is that when staff put this together, they put care into saying that it is a guideline, but there is room for interpretation. Why? Because no 2 cases would be the same, right? If this were pure math, we wouldn't be having these discussions because they had the foresight to know that everything was a case-by-case basis and would need to be discussed. And what's unique and specific about this is that we're not talking about taking a 1-story house and making it 2 stories, thus shifting the balance. It's actually already a 2-story house. What we're actually talking about is splitting the lot. So changing the denominator, not the numerator, as it were, to a degree. And thus is why we're having this discussion. This is exactly why when staff put this guideline together, we would need to debate it. Because if they were to maximize the footprint of a 2-story house, even if they split it into 2 structures, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's really the lot split that is triggering the debate. And I don't believe that lot splits were the intent of the 50% rule, but they are something we should be careful in considering. And and the applicant was extremely careful in considering it. I mean, the design of the two-story is the lowest it could possibly be. They adjusted to avoid setbacks. They oriented it in a way that minimized the view, moving it from a front to back. I can't think of anything more that could have been done to carry the spirit of what the town is intending against the unique circumstances that that come, in front of us. So, yeah. So my interpretation of all this, and I put this forward to my fellow board members to discuss and debate as needed, is that that in the case of this type of lot split, where the design and the approvals are happening contiguous with the lot split, with the front to back orientation, is such that it falls within the original intent of the 50% rule, coupled with the care and attention to detail that the applicants have put forward. If this isn't a case where the lot was split and then several years from now we're talking about what to put there, this is a unified package that combines structural development with parcel apportioning, and then with the extra care that was put into this. To me, it's exactly why staff created the guidelines outside the 50% rule for this board to interpret and debate. So those are my thoughts, but I welcome anyone from the board to add or modify. Okay.
I'll go. My argument against that is, against your comments, Michael, are that there is no necessity to split this lot. Yeah, there is no question that the quality is good of the front house and the back house, but there is no reason that that back house couldn't meet the code. My problem is considering granting exceptions when there's no requirement to have this lot split, and there's no requirement that this house, the only way it can fit is to be 2 stories. Those conditions don't exist. There is one lot. They can build a 2,500 square foot house, or they can split the lot and build a small house on the back lot. The intent of the code is written to limit the number of 2-story houses. And in this case, that is going to be, is already over by the front house. If we ignore the rule, I feel that we're ignoring the municipal code, the general plan, and the interests of the residents, as stated, in keeping that in the general plan process that we just went through. And I don't feel that lowering the roof height does anything to change that fact, because it is still a 2-story house. We went through this discussion on the lot that Sandra referenced earlier on Yonk Cross Road. The municipal code does not have a distinction for a 1.5-story house. It's a 1-story house or it's a 2-story house. So I have no problem with the design. I think they're beautiful. I just don't find any reason to grant any exception, because having a 2-story house there is not a necessity. So those are my thoughts.
Member Jordan, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I agree with Member Cook with regard to fairness and uniformity, but I truly feel that the impact of this east lot is going to be so low that there's really no reason not to grant them the right to do this. If you consider walking through a modern subdivision like Washington Park and so forth, when you walk in front of or near a 2-story home, they're very impactful. They're right on the property line. They really hit you. Whereas when you travel up and down Jefferson Street from one end to the other, there are many 2 stories that just don't really jump out at you, like Eric Knight's home, for example, the chef's home. There's several examples like that. So theirs, I feel, is about as low impact as a person can expect. So I'm inclined to say yes and let them go forward with the project. It's not like they're hardcore developing, trying to put a big monster of a home in front of the lot. We already have what we have. There's a 2-story there now. It's been there forever. So that's my gut feeling on this.
Okay, Jordan. Member Pena.
I've been struggling with this as well because of the 50% rule, and because we worked so hard in the general plan to try, and we spent hours upon hours to try and get this in the general plan and in a very usable way. I guess I have a question. The question that sticks in my mind is, are we now going to be faced, well, two questions actually. First one is, are we going to be faced with doing every single type of situation like this individually? Because then we might as well not have the 50% rule, because we're not able to, we'll be doing it individually. So are we creating what we're going to be looking at down the road? And secondarily, are we leaving ourselves and the town open for any kind of liability to, for example, the Yountville Crossroad that was refused because it was a story and a half, and it was refused using the 50% rule? And if we now start to change the game, how do we leave ourselves open for any past liability to come back to us? And maybe that's a question for Gary, for Mr. Bell.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So each application is considered on its own facts with the evidence that's in the record before you. And the town, including the ZDRB, has immunity for issuing or not issuing a permit, approval, or entitlement. So that's a state law provision that grants immunity to the town for proceedings like this one. And then on top of that, you're also taking each application on its face based on the unique facts for that. So I don't see liability in this case.
Thank you. No more questions on my side then.
Thank you, Member Pena. I would only remind us to go back to the way in which this particular guidance was written in the code. That it was decided that it should be 50-50. When we talked in the last session, the question I asked was, what was the intent of this guideline? What problem was it trying to solve? Was it a math problem, or was it a urban landscape issue? And it's a challenge where you attempt to quantify the subjective. How do you put a number to an impression? How do you say, well, this is too dense, this is not dense enough, there are too many of this type of building not? You have to put a number to it. I suspect that the process was to do the best job. It wasn't 60-40, it could have been 60-40. It was decided 50-50 for some reason, that 50% of structures. So thus is the quantification. But when it was written, the reality was that they said, well, this is our best attempt at quantifying it, but the reality is everything is a case-by-case basis. Why would circumstances differ from case to case? And that's exactly the situation we're finding ourselves. Every case is unique. The applicants, I think, did an admirable job explaining the nature of the property, pointing out how a smaller footprint of a house makes a better use of an ADU, which is obviously in the best interest of the town and the state. When I think about what the intent of the language that says, in determining which two-story structure should be counted, the ZDRB may take into account the relative visibility, location, and massing of structures in the two-story structures in the vicinity, the width of the street, significant vegetation, visual impacts. The applicants did everything to address that. I believe that they create a better house on the back of the property that believe it makes room for an ADU. And to me, the intent of this code was very much met in everything that the applicants did on a case-by-case basis. And if we want to run the town by math, then I think we're going to, miss the point, because this isn't a math problem. This is a design and problem that needs to be solved in the context of the land, and our intent to push forward the best use of the land and the best possible impact that it makes on the town itself. And so I'd put forward that if we fall on the math, then we've undermined the intent of the code and how it was written. Are there any other comments, or does anyone want to proceed with making a motion?
Michael, are we gonna adjust the motion in two parts? Are we gonna move about the lot split? And then move about the remainder, the design plans? How are we gonna handle those?
Yes, Sandra?
I could jump in. You have before you the design review tonight. If design review is granted for these two homes, we would proceed to take the map to the town council for approval.
Okay. All right, with that, if there's no further commentary or a motion is presented, I will move to approve these amended designs, factoring in all the changes and adjustments that were presented before us as presented. With no other recommended amendments. Is there a second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Be noted, the motion has passed.
Thank you, everybody.
So at this point,
Thank you very much for your time. I can honestly tell you, I think the result of this process is we have a better project than we started with. And I've done this more than once, and that's not always the case, but this was certainly the case in this instance. We appreciate your time and all your input. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you very much, and appreciate the collaboration and the feedback. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All right, Lynn, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and appreciate everything.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.